Have you ever carried silence for so long it became a part of who you are? Lucas Merritt did. After losing his wife and burying his voice in the hills of the West, he lived alone for years until the day he stepped into town and saw her, a young Apache woman, shackled, bruised, left behind because she refused to kneel. No one wanted her, but Lucas did something no one expected. He bought her, not to own her, but because walking away felt like losing something all over again. What would you do if standing still meant someone else might break? This is not a love story. It is a story about staying, about choosing what is hard when it is the only thing right. Stay with us. Let this story unfold quietly, like snow over broken land. Lucas Merritt had not spoken to another soul in 8 years. Not truly. He had nodded to the man who sold him nails in town, tipped his hat to the boy who rode past his land during spring thaw. But words full, human words with weight and purpose, those had left his mouth the day his wife died. That morning, he woke before the sun, like he always did. The wind scraped across the prairie in dry strokes, rattling the loose boards of the barn roof. His boots hit the cold wooden floor of the cabin, slow and certain. He moved through routine like a man stuck between days that all looked the same. Coffee boiled over the fire. He poured it into a dented tin mug, sipped it while standing, eyes unfocused. Outside, the frost painted the grass in brittle white. The pasture stretched in silence. One mule, too old to ride, but too stubborn to die, stood still by the fence line. Lucas scratched at his beard. He needed lamp oil, flour, too, salt, maybe. He had a list somewhere, but the items were always the same. That was why he went into Dusthorn that day. The road was hard-packed dirt, winding between cracked rock and dry shrubs. His wagon creaked with each mile. The mule moved without needing to be told, like Lucas. It had learned the rhythm of a life that never changed. He kept his eyes on the road. Dusthorn was a town he tolerated, not one he cared for. The people were polite in a tight-lipped way. They remembered the war. Some remembered Lucas. None asked how he was. He preferred it that way. But when he turned onto Main Street, the sound stopped him. Not the usual clatter of boots or market shouts. This was different. It was quieter, tense. He slowed the mule and saw the crowd near the center of the yard. Men clustered around something. Some were laughing, others were silent in that strange way men are when they know something is wrong, but say nothing. Lucas thought about steering the wagon around them. He hated these things. But then he heard the word Apache. He stopped. He climbed down from the wagon slowly. The crowd parted just enough. And that was when he saw her. She stood chained to a post. Not slumped, not weeping. She stood. Her face was unreadable. Her eyes stared straight ahead, not at the men, not at the sky. Through them, past them. She wore a buckskin dress that had been torn down the front. Beads and feathers still clung to the seams, though dirt had dulled their color. Her arms were bare. Her wrists were red, rubbed raw where the shackles bit. She looked young, maybe mid-20s. Her hair was thick and dark, falling wild across her back. Parts of it had been braided once. Not anymore. No one touched her. Not in that moment. But Lucas could see they had. You could see it in how she held her shoulders. They cannot sell her. Someone muttered behind him. Stood there 3 days. Says nothing. Does nothing. Just stares. She cursed another asked. Worse. Proud. Lucas said nothing. But his jaw tightened. His hands clenched and then relaxed again. He stepped forward. The girl's eyes moved, just barely. She looked at him, not in hope, not in fear, just looked, measured. And something inside him shifted. He could have walked away. He should have. But he reached into his coat, pulled out the money he meant for salt and flour. How much his voice was rough, unused. The man who had been trying to auction her off blinked. She is not worth the trouble. But for that price, Lucas placed the bills in his hand. No receipt, he said. The man shrugged, unlocked the chains. They fell to the dirt with a sound that felt too loud. Lucas turned back toward the wagon. The girl stood still. Then, after a moment, she stepped forward. No one said anything. Lucas did not touch her. He did not look back. He climbed up onto the wagon bench. She followed. She sat beside him, and for the first time in 8 years, Lucas Merritt was not alone. Tyann did not flinch when the chains dropped. She did not rub her wrists. She did not look at the men who had tried to sell her. She only stared at the space in front of her, as if it was safer than seeing anything else. She had stood that way for 3 days. Lucas did not know that until later. But he knew something when she looked at him. There was no hope in her eyes. No thanks. Only a stillness that unsettled him. He had seen that stillness before, in the eyes of soldiers, in the mirror. He walked ahead without a word. The air in Dusthorn was dry and bitter. The wagon creaked as he climbed onto the seat. The mule shifted its weight, snorted once, then he felt her beside him. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, her face calm, but her feet were bare. Dirt covered the tops of her toes. Her dress hung loose, torn, exposing more than it should. She made no move to fix it. Lucas did not speak. He took off his coat and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at him, then back at the coat. She took it, held it across her knees, not over her shoulders. The mule moved with a light flick of the reins. They left town slowly, behind them. Laughter faded. No one followed. The road back to the ranch was long, dry rock on both sides, tall grass that cracked in the wind. The air smelled like dust and smoke from someone's trash fire. Tyann said nothing. Lucas kept his eyes ahead. He thought about the chicken pen that needed mending, the fence post near the creek that leaned too far now. He had meant to fix it last month. The silence between them felt thick, not heavy with tension, heavy with something else, something undefined. He glanced at her. Her wrists were raw. The red marks stood out against her skin. She did not hide them. She did not hide anything. She glanced toward the horizon, and then down at her hands. He wondered what she saw when she looked at them. If she remembered what they had held, what they had lost. Lucas knew what it was like to measure your life by what was no longer in it. His wife had died in early spring, pneumonia. She had coughed for 5 days straight, then stopped. The grave sat on the hill behind his cabin. He had placed a flat stone there, no name, just a shape to mark the pain. That was 8 years ago. He had not planned to bring anyone back into that space. Not ever. But now there was a woman beside him. Not a wife, not a servant, just someone who had no other place to go, and who had not begged for one. The wagon rolled over a shallow rise. The ranch appeared in the distance. 2 fences, a barn with a crooked roof, a well with a cracked handle. The cabin stood small, almost apologetic, near a grove of dry trees. Tyann shifted in her seat when she saw it. Her eyes moved quickly, from the land, to the buildings, to him. Lucas did not say anything. He stopped the wagon near the barn, climbed down, then waited. She stepped down without help. Her feet touched the dry soil. Her jaw clenched once from the pain. Then it passed. Lucas led the way to the cabin. He opened the door, then stepped aside. She paused, looked inside. A table, a stove, 2 beds, one higher, one lower, a short wooden wall dividing part of the space. She entered without hesitation. He gestured toward the smaller bed. That one. If you want it. She looked at it, then sat down, her back straight, her hands in her lap. Lucas nodded once, then turned to the stove. He added wood, lit the flame, poured water into the pot. She watched him, quiet, not suspicious, just watching. He made stew, thick with beans and what little squash remained. He set her bowl on the floor near the fire, his on the table. She stayed by the fire, cross-legged, coat still over her legs. The room held 2 people, in silence. Lucas ate slow. Her spoon scraped against the tin. He listened. Then he glanced at the window. The wind outside had picked up. It would snow before morning. He stood, placed a second blanket on her bed, a third on the chair, just in case. Then he pulled an old board and some sacks from the wall, measured the space beside her cot. He said nothing. She said nothing. But she watched him build that silence with care. That night, the cabin held a cold that crept through the seams in the wood. Lucas banked the fire before lying down. He wrapped himself in the worn quilt, back to the room. He did not look toward her. He listened. The rustle of a blanket, the soft pad of bare feet across the floor. Then stillness. He turned his head just enough to see Tyen had not taken the bed. She had laid a folded blanket near the stove, curled beside it, back to him, the coat he had given her tucked over her knees, her dress torn and thin, offered little warmth. Lucas watched the firelight flicker across her back. He did not speak. He only stared at the ceiling beams and counted each one, the way he always did when sleep did not come. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, silence stretched long and wide. At some point, she stirred, not fully awake. A shift, a breath. He rose without a word, pulled another blanket from the chair, stepped softly across the cabin. He laid it beside her, did not touch her, did not speak. She did not move, but the next morning, he noticed it pulled tight around her shoulders. The second day passed in silence. Lucas chopped wood, fed the mule, checked the leaning post by the creek. Tyen stayed inside. When he returned, the cabin smelled like warm stone and pine smoke. She had not lit the lamp. She sat cross-legged by the fire again. Same posture, same stillness. That night, she chose the floor again. Lucas added a third blanket without comment. On the third day, she swept the cabin. No one asked her to. She used the old broom, moved slow, steady. Her eyes focused on the corners, on the dust, on something that was not him. Lucas watched from the doorway. That afternoon, he fixed the broken hinge on the chicken pen. She appeared beside him with a bucket of feed, set it down, did not speak. He nodded. That was all. When the sun dipped low, she returned to the fire. Lucas ladled soup into 2 bowls, placed one near her, one on the table. She moved to the table slowly, sat across from him, did not look directly at him, but she sat. That was something. They ate in silence, spoons scraping, fire cracking, the sounds of people still learning how to breathe in the same space. After supper, Lucas sharpened a knife by the window. She brushed her long hair behind her shoulders, sat near the stove. Their eyes met, just for a moment. Not long, but enough to say, "I see you." The snow came the next morning, not thick, but steady. It layered the roof, softened the sound outside, inside. The cabin held a gentle warmth. Lucas stirred the fire. Tyen remained curled on the floor, not yet stirring. He dressed quietly, pulled on his boots, went outside to feed the mule. When he returned, she was awake, sitting, legs drawn in, her hair loose. She did not speak, but her eyes followed him now. He boiled water, set out a tin cup, coffee, no sugar. She glanced at the cup, then at him, then looked away. Lucas sat at the table, sipped his coffee slow. The cabin felt less empty, not full, but different. He did not understand it, but he did not push it away. That evening, he placed the coat over the back of her cot. Did not say why. She took it when she thought he was not watching. The nights grew colder, but for the first time in 8 years, they did not feel empty, just quiet. Lucas built the divider on the 5th day. Not a wall, just a row of boards, wide enough to give her a corner that felt like hers. He measured the space carefully, left enough room for the cot, hung an old sheet from a beam. It fluttered slightly in the draft near the stove. He did not explain it. Tyen watched in silence, her face unreadable. That night, she slept behind the divider. It did not block sound, did not block the firelight, but it gave her a boundary, a place where she could sleep without his eyes. In the morning, she folded her blanket neatly, placed it back on the cot. Then, without a word, she swept the cabin again. Lucas noticed, said nothing. When he went outside to check the fence, she followed, not close, but not far. She watched how he handled the post, how he tested the wire, listened to the pull. He handed her a mallet. She took it, no hesitation. Together, they mended the fence, not quickly, not gracefully, but together. That evening, Lucas left her bowl on the table. She sat across from him. This time, she looked at him once, just once, then back at her food. It was something. The next day, she mended the torn corner of the curtain by the window, used a thread pulled from the inside of her dress. Her stitches were uneven but careful. She did not ask if it was allowed. She just did it. Lucas noticed the change, small things, the way she hung her coat instead of folding it, the way she began braiding her hair again, piece by piece, the way she placed kindling near the stove before sunset, all without being asked. He watched her hands more than her face. They moved with purpose, not as a guest, not as a servant, as someone who intended to stay. That realization brought a strange weight. Lucas sat by the fire one evening, hands wrapped around a warm tin cup. Tyen sat near the stove, her back to him. He looked at her, then at the flame, and something inside him whispered, "What are you doing?" Was this mercy, guilt, or something he did not dare name? He had not meant to bring her here. He had not meant to let her stay, but she was here now. And the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt alive. That thought unsettled him. He went outside, stared at the moon hanging low over the pasture. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow. He thought of the grave on the hill, of the nights he stood there, speaking to someone who never answered. He had not stood there since Tyen arrived. That absence felt like betrayal, but also like a shift. The next morning, he chopped wood behind the barn. Tyen brought kindling to the porch. She placed it in a stack, aligned the edges. When he looked up, she was watching him, not with suspicion, not with fear, just watching. He nodded once, she nodded back, and for the first time, they shared a silent agreement. We are here, together, whatever that meant. The days grew shorter. Snow fell more often, sometimes light, sometimes heavy. The cabin, once a place of echoes, now held quiet motion. Tyen swept, mended, lit the stove before dusk. Lucas worked the field when weather allowed, fed the mule, chopped wood, hammered nails into things that would never be truly fixed. One night, after supper, they sat near the fire, not close, but not far. The kind of distance where a voice could reach if one chose to speak. Tyen did. Her voice came soft, low, rough from disuse. I was not supposed to be sold. Lucas did not move. My father arranged a marriage. I refused. Said I brought shame. They left me behind. Her hands rested in her lap. Still, they thought I would die, or be taken. Either way, I was not their burden anymore. Lucas stared at the fire. I was taken, she said, dragged for miles. When I would not speak, they beat me. When I did speak, they laughed. She did not cry. Her voice did not shake. I stopped speaking. The fire popped. Wood cracked in the heat. Lucas took a slow breath, then another, and then he said something he had never said out loud. I was a scout. Tyen turned her head slightly. He kept his eyes on the flames. During the war, I tracked villages, marked them for raids. I did not pull the trigger, but I told them where to aim. Silence. I do not know if your village was one of them, but I cannot swear it was not. More silence. He dared to look at her. Her face had no expression. None. She rose, crossed to the stove, pulled her blanket from the cot, then walked to the floor. The same corner she had used that first night. She lay down, back turned. Lucas sat by the fire long after the flame began to die. He did not speak again. He could not. That night, the wind howled louder than usual. The roof groaned, the logs shifted, but the worst sound was the silence between them. No soft breath of trust, no glance across the room, only cold, real, and earned. Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling beams again, counting them like a penance. The next day, Tyen said nothing. She did her chores, fed the chickens, repaired the hinge on the cellar door. She did not sweep. Lucas noticed, but said nothing. He worked quietly, tried to keep his boots light on the floorboards. But guilt is heavier than footsteps. When he came inside that evening, she was sitting near the window, her hands in her lap, her gaze outside. The snow had not yet started, but the sky promised it. Lucas set down a fresh bucket of water. She did not move. He turned to the fire, stoked it, then sat at the table with a bowl of stew he could not taste. He looked at her again, and for the first time, he saw not a stranger, not a burden, but a mirror. Tyen had been left behind. So had he. She had been marked by silence. So had he. But unlike him, she had not chosen it. It had been forced on her. And still, she endured. He thought of saying something, but knew it would not help. So he cleaned his bowl, placed it beside the others, laid a blanket near her cot again, and went to bed, without expectation, without comfort. That night, he dreamed of fire, and ash, and a woman with a torn braid standing in the snow. Not Tyen, but someone like her, someone his memory refused to name. The snow melted slow that week. The path leading from the cabin to the ridge thawed just enough to walk. Lucas noticed it first. The ice had loosened. The trees had shed their frost. The wind had shifted. If Tyen wanted to leave, she could. He did not say that out loud, but he knew she had seen the same signs. She stood outside longer that morning, wrapped in the coat, her eyes toward the hills, toward the line of trees that marked the edge of his land. She stayed there for nearly an hour. Lucas watched from the barn, did not move, did not call to her. Inside, the fire burned low. The stew pot sat cold on the stove. He did not reheat it. He just waited. When she returned, her boots were muddy, her steps quiet. She set a bucket of water near the door, then sat down on the stool beside the stove. No words. But she was back. Lucas felt the breath he had not realized he was holding begin to ease. That afternoon, they worked in silence. A piece of fencing had cracked near the western edge of the pasture. Lucas pulled the wire taut, held it with his gloved hands. Tyan stepped beside him, held out the hammer. Her fingers brushed his. Not by accident, not forceful, just there, solid, then gone. He looked at her once. She looked back. Nothing passed between them. And everything did. That night, he placed 2 bowls on the table. She sat down without pause, ate quietly, slowly. He did not stare, but he noticed. Her hair was freshly braided, her shoulders relaxed, her eyes steady. After supper, she took the empty bowls to the basin, washed them, then dried both. She folded the towel, hung it carefully. Lucas added wood to the fire, pulled the lamp closer to the wall, scribbled measurements for the new gate post. When he looked up, she was standing by her cot. She did not pick up the blanket from the floor. She turned, walked to the bed, sat, pulled the quilt over her legs. Lucas watched, unsure if she would lie down. She did, back to the wall, face toward the fire, her hands tucked under the pillow. She did not sleep quickly. He could tell by her breathing, but she stayed. In the bed, not the floor. He stared at the ceiling beams again, but this time he did not count them. His mind was somewhere else, floating, settling, warming. The next morning, the air was crisp. Lucas moved quietly, same as always. Tyen was still in bed when he stoked the fire, but her eyes opened when he turned. She did not speak. He nodded once. She nodded back. No smile. No words. But something old had shifted, not erased, not forgotten, but moved, enough to make room for something else. The snow deepened in the second week of January. Days passed without words, but not without presence. Lucas found himself looking toward the door more often. And when it opened, and Tyen stepped through, with her boots crusted in snow, a strange calm returned to his chest. She began tending the animals in the morning. Without being asked, the hens clucked softly when she entered. The mule followed her steps with sleepy eyes. Lucas watched her move across the yard, her braid tight, her hands steady. She belonged to the land more than he ever had. That fact stirred something inside him, not envy, something closer to awe and fear. Because every time he felt something pull toward her, he reminded himself, do not ask for more than what is given. Each morning, he left gloves for her on the porch. Some days, she wore them. Others, she did not. But she never ignored them. She chopped wood beside him now, gathered water from the creek, carried feed in buckets that looked too heavy for her arms. But she never complained. They shared tools, passed them back and forth without touching fingers, except once. He handed her a knife. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Neither spoke. But that touch stayed with him longer than it should have. That evening, Tyen sat nearer to the fire. Lucas sat in the chair behind her, oiling a saddle strap. The flames cast long shadows across the floor. Her face was soft in the glow, eyes half-lidded, elbows on her knees. He wanted to speak, to say something simple, anything. But words felt too heavy, too sharp. What could he say that would not tip this delicate balance? So he stayed quiet, and in that quiet, he felt her presence like warmth, not passion, not yet, but warmth that did not ask, that did not demand. He cleaned the strap until his fingers ached. When he looked up, she had already moved to her cot. She had not said goodnight. She never did. But the way she had looked at him before rising, it held something unspoken, a softness, a question neither of them dared ask. That night, Lucas lay awake longer than usual. He stared at the ceiling, counted knots in the beams, then lost count. He thought of the firelight on her skin, the way she moved through the cabin now, like it was hers, but not claimed, the way her hands lingered just a little longer when she brushed past him. He wanted to reach out, to ask, but asking meant changing everything, and what they had quiet, tentative, honest, was already more than he had ever expected. So he stayed still. Let the silence speak for him. The way it always had, the snow had begun to melt, not quickly, not in any way that mattered to most. But Lucas noticed it, the way he always noticed small changes. The creek gurgled louder beneath the ice. The sun lingered just a moment longer in the afternoons. Tayan stood by the window one morning, arms crossed over her chest. Her braid hung loose down her back. The shirt she wore was his, sleeves rolled up. Her voice was steady. My monthly did not come. Lucas turned from the stove. He said nothing at first. She looked at him directly. I counted twice. The words hung in the air like a breath not yet released. Lucas stepped closer. Not hurried, not slow. He studied her face. She did not flinch. He took a breath, then spoke. Do you think I do not know yet? She said. But I want to ask something. He waited. If I carry your child, I want them to have a name. He nodded. I want them to belong here. He nodded again. I want to belong here. Not as someone rescued, not as a guest, as your wife. Lucas felt the words settle in his chest. Heavy. Real. He walked to the shelf by the fire, opened the small wooden box. Inside, the ring lay wrapped in old linen. He carried it to her, held it out in his open palm. You sure? He asked. Yes, she said. Her voice did not shake. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. Her hand trembled just slightly, then stilled. That night, they did not speak much. The lamp burned low. The fire cast soft light across the floor. Tayan stood by the stove, her arms folded, watching the coals settle. Lucas sat behind her, rubbing his palms together. She turned, stepped closer, then closer still. He did not move. She placed her hand on his chest, flat, warm, over the place where his heartbeat lived. Her eyes looked at him, not questioning, just present. Are you sure? He asked again. She nodded. I stayed. He stood, took her hand, led her to the bed. There were no rushed movements, no demands, just slow breath, quiet hands. When she removed her shirt, he looked at her with reverence, not hunger. When she touched his shoulder, it was with knowing. When they lay together, it was not to possess, not to prove, but to share, to choose. Afterward, she curled into him. Her cheek rested against his chest, one arm across his ribs. Lucas held her gently. They did not speak, but everything had been said. When he closed his eyes, he did not see the grave. He saw her, breathing, here, now. The ground had begun to thaw. Lucas stood beside Tayan near the hill behind the cabin. The wind carried the scent of wet soil and old pine. The grave of Claire, his late wife, lay beneath a flat stone, no name, just a marker of a life once shared. Tayan held the ring, not the one on her finger, the old one, the one Lucas had kept in a drawer for nearly a decade. She unwrapped it slowly, let the sunlight touch its surface, then knelt, placed it gently near the stone, covered it with a smooth, white rock. Lucas did not speak. Tayan whispered, "Not because she is gone, but because she gave us space." He nodded. They stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the cabin. 3 days later, a rider came from Dusthorn. Younger man, red cheeks, nervous hands. He carried a sack of supplies, flour, salt, tobacco, coffee beans, a coil of wire. Lucas stepped onto the porch. Tayan stayed inside, but she heard, "You still out here alone?" the rider asked. Lucas looked at him, then at the land beyond the trees. "No," he said. The rider shifted his weight. "Some folks in town still talk about that Apache woman from the sale last fall." Lucas said nothing. "They said you took her in, that she was the one no one wanted." Lucas's voice was steady. "I did not take her." The rider frowned. "She chose to stay." The rider nodded slowly, then more respectfully. "Well, sounds like she is lucky." Lucas did not smile. "No," he said. "I am." That evening, Tayan sat near the fire, sharpening one of the old knives, her movements calm, purposeful. Lucas watched from across the room. The firelight danced across her hands. She did not look up when she spoke. "You think people will always talk Lucas stirred the coals?" "Probably." She nodded. "I do not care." He nodded too. "You should not." She placed the knife down, walked over, sat beside him. He did not move. Her hand reached for his, fingers laced, solid, no words, but enough. Outside, the snow had melted into soft mud. Birds had begun to return. Inside, the cabin felt like home, not because of the walls or the fire, but because neither of them looked toward the door anymore. Spring came slow and soft. The snow melted into the soil. Patches of green began to rise along the fence line. Birds returned. The wind smelled like new earth. Lucas stood by the edge of the pasture, leaning on a post he had set years ago. The wood was worn, but still holding. Tayan crouched nearby, fingers buried in the damp dirt. She planted onions in small rows, not many, but enough. Her belly had not yet shown, but her movements were different, careful, focused. Lucas watched her for a long moment. She glanced up, shielded her eyes from the sun. "You are staring again," she said. He smiled faintly. "I know." Inside the cabin, things had changed. A second shelf had gone up near the table. Hers, a cradle unfinished, sat by the hearth. Lucas worked on it each evening, carving slowly. The divider was still there. Out of respect, but they had not used it in weeks. The space was no longer shared. It was theirs. Together. One morning, as he boiled water for coffee, Tayan stood near the basin. She turned, wiped her hands on a cloth, then said it. "I am sure now." Lucas paused. "All right," he said, then walked to her, not quickly, but not slow. He placed one hand on her waist, one over her hand. She leaned her forehead against his chest. Neither spoke, but the truth between them was strong. "I want this child to have a home," she whispered. Lucas nodded. "They will, and a name," she added, "one that means something." He smiled again. "If it is a boy," he said, "we name him after my father." Tayan looked up. "And if it is a girl," We let her choose. She smiled too. Just barely, but it was real. That night, after supper, she placed the old ring in a folded cloth, set it in a carved box near the cradle. Lucas did not ask why. He did not need to. The ring's journey was complete. It had moved from past to present, and now waited for what came next. The sun returned in full that week. Long golden light spilled across the fields. Mud gave way to warm soil. Lucas repaired the last piece of fencing. Tyen hung, washed linen, on a line outside. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and early mint. One evening, they stood on the porch together, Lucas' arm around her waist, Tyen's hand resting on her stomach. They looked out over the land, no longer watching the gate, no longer waiting for someone to leave, only seeing what had grown and what would grow next. Sometimes, healing does not come from forgetting the past, it comes from choosing to live differently with it. Lucas did not save Tyen, and Tyen did not come to fix him. They stayed. Not because they were perfect, but because they chose to build something new in the quiet ruins of what life had broken. Many of us carry old pain, grief, regret, the silence between what we lost and what we still hope for. But this story reminds us that even after the worst storms, something can still grow. Even if it starts small, a shared meal, a kind glance, a moment of stillness. We do not always get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose what we do next. You are never too old to begin again, and sometimes just staying, just showing up each day with quiet care. That is enough to make a life worth living. Let that be your reminder today. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or made you pause and reflect, please take a moment to like the video. Share it with someone who might need it today. And if you want more stories like this, stories that echo with life, loss, and quiet hope, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than words can say. We will see you in the next story.